I spent 30 years saving for one dream, but I never imagined the person who would take it away would be my own son. My name is Margaret Collins, and for most of my life, I believed family was the one thing you could always count on. I was 67 years old when I finally bought the one thing I had promised myself for decades, a beautiful used RV sitting in my driveway under the morning sunlight. To most people, it was just a vehicle. But to me, it represented every early morning shift, every sacrifice, and every moment when I put someone else's needs before my own. After my husband passed away, I spent years raising my son Ethan by myself. There were times when money was tight, times when I wondered if I was doing enough, and times when I had to make difficult choices. But I never regretted giving him a good childhood. Ethan was my pride and joy. He was the little boy who used to hold my hand while walking into school for the first time. He was the teenager who would sit at the kitchen table and tell me about his dreams. He was the young man who promised me that one day, after all my years of working hard, I would finally enjoy life for myself. That promise stayed with me. So when I retired, I decided it was time to create a dream of my own. I did not want anything extravagant. I did not need a huge house or expensive vacations. I wanted freedom. I wanted to travel across America, visit small towns, see national parks, and wake up somewhere new with a cup of coffee in my hand. The RV became a symbol of that new chapter. I spent months researching different models, visiting dealerships, and carefully choosing the one that felt right. It had comfortable seating, a small kitchen, and everything I needed for the adventures I had waited so long to experience. I still remember the day I brought it home. I stood in my driveway for almost an hour just looking at it. I felt proud. I felt hopeful. For the first time in many years, I was doing something completely for myself. Ethan was happy for me when he saw it. At least, that was what I believed. He walked around the RV, smiled, and said, "Mom, I cannot believe you finally did it. You deserve this." Those words meant everything to me. I trusted him completely. I never thought there would come a day when I would question whether my own son respected what this dream meant to me. But life has a way of showing us things we never expect. A few months later, Ethan and his wife Lauren started facing some personal challenges. They never asked me directly for help, but I noticed small changes in the way they talked. There were more conversations about expenses, plans, and things they wanted to change in their lives. I tried to be supportive, as any mother would. I wanted Ethan to be happy. I wanted his marriage to succeed. I believed helping my child did not mean controlling his choices. It meant being there when he truly needed me. What I did not know was that behind the conversations I was not part of, a decision was being made about something that belonged to me, something I had worked years to earn, something that represented my independence. One ordinary afternoon, while I was preparing lunch at home, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another advertisement. But something made me answer. The voice on the other end was polite but serious. "Hello, is this Margaret Collins?" "Yes," I replied. "This is Rick from Lakeside RV Dealership. I am calling because we need to confirm some information about your RV sale." My heart immediately sank. "My RV sale?" I repeated. There was a short pause. Then Rick asked a question that changed everything. "Were you aware that your RV had been sold?" In that moment, I felt like the entire room had gone silent. Because I knew one thing for certain. I had never sold my dream RV. And if someone else had, I needed to know exactly how it happened. After the call with Rick from Lakeside RV Dealership, I stayed frozen in my kitchen for several minutes, trying to understand what I had just heard. I looked out the window toward my driveway, expecting to see my RV sitting there exactly where I had left it. But the space was empty. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Rick had the wrong person. Maybe there was another Margaret Collins who owned a similar RV. I wanted there to be another explanation because the alternative was too painful to accept. I called Rick back and asked him to explain everything. His voice remained calm as he told me that someone had recently come into the dealership claiming to have permission to sell the RV. "The paperwork listed your name as the owner," he said. "That is why we wanted to confirm the details before completing everything." My hands felt cold as I listened. "Who brought it in?" I asked. There was a pause before he answered. "Your son, Ethan." Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. Not because I could not believe Ethan needed help. I had spent my entire life helping him. Not because he made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. What hurt was that he had taken something that represented my independence without even asking me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had watched Ethan do homework as a child, the same place where we had shared countless meals and conversations. And suddenly, I wondered how a person I trusted so completely could make a decision like this. I called Ethan immediately. He answered after a few rings. "Mom, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Ethan, I just received a call from Lakeside RV dealership." There was a moment of silence. It was brief, but I noticed it. "What did they tell you?" he asked. His question surprised me. I expected him to sound confused. Instead, he sounded worried. "They told me my RV was sold." Another silence followed. This one lasted longer. "Mom," he finally said, "I was going to talk to you." Those words were the ones that broke my heart the most. Not because they were an admission, but because they confirmed he knew I should have been part of that conversation. "When were you planning to talk to me, Ethan?" I asked. He struggled to answer. "I know this looks bad." I closed my eyes. "It does not just look bad. It feels like you made a decision about my life without me." Ethan tried to explain. He told me that he and Lauren had been dealing with some personal expenses. He said Lauren had been feeling unhappy about herself and wanted to make a change. He explained that the procedure was something she had been thinking about for a long time, and he wanted to support her. I listened quietly. I understood wanting to support a spouse. I understood wanting to make the person you love feel better. But understanding something does not mean accepting everything about it. "Ethan," I said, "why was my RV the answer?" He became quiet. Then he admitted that he thought I was not using it enough. He said he believed I would eventually understand. Those words stayed with me, because my RV was never just about how often I used it. It was about having something that belonged to me. It was about the years of patience and sacrifice behind that purchase. It was about finally allowing myself to enjoy the life I had worked so hard to build. "Mom, I was going to replace it," Ethan said. "I was going to make things right." I looked around my quiet kitchen and felt a sadness I could not explain. "Ethan, you cannot replace the feeling of being considered." He did not answer. For the first time in our conversation, I think he understood that this was not about money. It was not even just about the RV. It was about trust. After we ended the call, I sat there thinking about the little boy who once promised he would always take care of me. I knew people changed as they grew older. I knew marriage changed priorities. But I never imagined that one day I would have to ask myself whether my own son still saw me as someone worth protecting. Then my phone rang again. It was Rick from the dealership. He said there was something else I needed to know about the sale before I made any decisions. And whatever he was about to tell me would reveal that this situation was more complicated than I first thought. After my conversation with Ethan, I could not stop thinking about Rick's final words. He had told me there was something important I needed to know before I decided what to do next. I spent that evening sitting in my living room, looking at the photographs on the wall. There was one of Ethan and me standing beside a small tent during a family camping trip when he was 12 years old. He had been so excited to spend time outdoors, and he kept talking about all the places he wanted to visit someday. That memory stayed with me because it reminded me of something important. Ethan loved adventures too. He understood why that RV mattered to me. He knew it was not just a vehicle sitting in the driveway. He knew it represented a dream we had talked about for years. The next morning, I drove to Lakeside RV dealership to speak with Rick in person. I wanted to understand exactly what had happened. I did not want assumptions. I did not want anger. I wanted the truth. When I arrived, Rick welcomed me into his office. He had a folder sitting on his desk. "Margaret, I want to be careful with how I explain this," he said. "We are not trying to create problems between you and your family. We just noticed some things about the transaction that made us uncomfortable." I nodded and waited. Rick explained that Ethan had brought the RV in and said he was handling the sale on behalf of his mother. The dealership employees believed there was permission because Ethan was my son and because he had information about the RV that only someone close to me would know. He knew the maintenance history. He knew where I had purchased it. He knew the details about my plans to travel. That was what made the situation so painful. Ethan did not act like someone who did not understand. He acted like someone who understood perfectly. Rick then showed me the documents connected to the transaction. He pointed out that there were questions about authorization that needed to be reviewed. The dealership had paused the process because they wanted confirmation from the actual owner. "We did not want to complete something that you did not personally approve," Rick explained. I appreciated that. In that moment, I realized something. A stranger at a dealership had been more careful with my dream than my own son had been. That thought hurt. but it also gave me clarity. When I returned home, I called Ethan again. This time, I did not call because I wanted answers. I called because I needed him to understand the impact of what he had done. Ethan, I said, I went to the dealership today. He became quiet. What did they say? I looked out the window at the empty space where my RV used to sit. They told me they stopped the process because they were not sure I approved the sale. There was silence. Mom, I was going to fix it. I heard the disappointment in his voice, but I also heard something else. He was beginning to realize this was bigger than he thought. Ethan, I need you to understand something. The hardest part is not losing the RV. The hardest part is knowing you looked at something that represented my independence and decided it was available for you to use. He sighed. I know I made a mistake. I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But part of me still wondered why he made that mistake in the first place. Did Lauren know? I asked. The pause before his answer told me everything. Yes, he finally said. I closed my eyes. I was not angry at Lauren alone. I was not interested in blaming one person. But I needed to understand how two people who claimed to love me could make a decision like this without asking. Ethan explained that Lauren had been feeling insecure and wanted to make a personal change before an important event. He said he thought helping her would make their marriage stronger. I listened carefully. I knew marriage required support and compromise. But I also knew something else. A person should not build happiness by taking away someone else's sense of security. After our conversation ended, I sat quietly for a long time. I realized I was facing a choice. I could focus only on what had been taken from me, or I could decide how I wanted to respond. I had spent my life teaching Ethan the importance of kindness and responsibility. Now I had to see whether those lessons were still somewhere inside him. But before I could make any decision, there was one more thing I needed to know. I needed to understand exactly why my son believed my dream was the easiest thing to sacrifice. I thought I understood the situation after speaking with Rick and Ethan, but there was still one question that stayed in my mind. Why did my son believe this was the only option? Why did he look at my dream and see something that could be taken, instead of something that should be respected? I knew Ethan was not a careless person. He was not someone who wanted to hurt me. That was what made the situation harder to accept. If a stranger had done this, I would have understood the reason. But when it came from my own son, I had to search for an answer. A few days later, Ethan asked if he could come over and talk. I agreed because I believed avoiding the conversation would only create more distance between us. When he arrived, he looked different. He was not defensive like before. He looked like someone who had finally realized the seriousness of his decision. We sat in the living room, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan said, "Mom, I owe you a real explanation." I nodded. "I am listening." He told me that everything started when Lauren became unhappy with herself. She had been struggling with confidence and wanted to make a personal change. Ethan said she had been thinking about cosmetic surgery for a long time and felt that it would help her feel better about herself. He wanted to support his wife, but he admitted that he made a terrible choice in how he tried to do it. "I thought I could solve the problem quickly," he said. "I thought you would understand because you have always helped me." Those words stayed with me, because in some ways, that was exactly the problem. Ethan had become so used to my support that he forgot support still required respect. "Ethan," I said, "there is a difference between helping your family and deciding that someone else's sacrifice is acceptable." He looked down. "I know that now." I asked him a question I had been carrying since the dealership called. "Did you ever stop and think about what that RV meant to me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he answered honestly, "Not enough." That honesty hurt, but it was better than an excuse. I told him about the years I spent saving for it. I explained that every payment represented a choice I made to wait, to be responsible, and to believe that someday I would have something just for myself. "When your father passed away, I spent years putting everyone else first," I said. "That RV was the first thing I bought because I wanted to enjoy my own life." Ethan listened carefully. For the first time, I saw that he truly understood. He was not just hearing the words. He was hearing the emotion behind them. "Mom, I am sorry," he said. "I should have talked to you. I should have asked. I should have respected that it was yours." I appreciated the apology, but I also knew that words alone could not repair everything. Trust is built over years and can be damaged in a single moment. I asked him about Lauren. I wanted to know if she understood how much this had affected me. Ethan said Lauren felt guilty but did not know how to approach me. He explained that she had been focused on her own worries and did not think about the impact on me. I listened because I wanted to understand, not because I wanted to excuse what happened. Later that week, I received a message from Lauren. She asked if we could talk. I agreed. When we met, she seemed nervous. She looked at me and said, "I know I cannot undo what happened, but I want you to know that I understand why you were hurt." I appreciated hearing that. I did not expect everything to become perfect overnight. Families do not heal that way. But I also knew something important. The first step toward rebuilding trust is when people stop defending their choices and start acknowledging the pain they caused. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. I was still hurt. The empty space in my driveway was still a reminder of what happened. But I also realized that this moment had revealed something important. My son had made a mistake, but he was finally beginning to see it. And now I had to decide whether this was the end of our relationship as I knew it, or the beginning of something more honest than before. After my conversation with Ethan and Lauren, I spent several days thinking about what forgiveness really meant. For most of my life, I believed forgiveness was something you gave when someone apologized. But as I got older, I realized forgiveness was not about pretending something never happened. It was about deciding whether the relationship was worth rebuilding. And with Ethan, I knew the answer was yes. He was still my son. One painful decision did not erase nearly 40 years of memories, love, and connection. But I also knew things could not simply return to the way they were before. Something had changed, and rebuilding trust would require more than a few conversations. It would require actions. A week later, Ethan called me and asked if I would meet him at Lakeside RV dealership. At first, I was confused. I wondered why he wanted me to go there. When I arrived, I saw Ethan standing outside with Rick. The sight of them together brought back all the emotions I had been trying to process. The empty driveway, the phone call, the feeling of discovering that something important to me had been decided without my voice. Ethan walked toward me and said, "Mom, I wanted you to see something." Rick greeted me warmly and explained that there had been a development with the RV. Because the dealership had paused the transaction, they had been able to review everything carefully. They discovered that the situation could be resolved, but it required a conversation with everyone involved. Ethan looked at me and said, "I know I cannot undo what I did, but I want to make this right." I listened. For the first time, I did not hear excuses in his voice. I heard responsibility. He explained that after our conversations, he realized he had been thinking only about solving an immediate problem. He had focused on helping Lauren without considering the long-term impact of his choice. "I was trying to be a good husband," he said, "but I forgot that being a good husband does not mean ignoring the people who love you." Those words meant a lot because that was the lesson I had hoped he would learn. I never wanted Ethan to choose between me and Lauren. I never wanted him to feel trapped between two important relationships. I wanted him to understand that respect should exist in every relationship. Rick then explained that the dealership had worked with Ethan to find a solution. The details were complicated, but the important part was that Ethan had taken responsibility for the situation. He was not waiting for someone else to fix it. He was making an effort himself. I looked at my son standing there, and I saw something different. I saw the little boy who once apologized after breaking something in the house because he was afraid of disappointing me. I saw the young man who wanted to make his family proud. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those values, but he was finding them again. "Ethan," I said, "I appreciate what you are doing, but I need you to understand that the RV was never the only issue." He nodded. "I know. The hardest part was feeling like my dreams were less important than someone else's needs." He looked at me and said, "You are right." That simple acknowledgement meant more than any expensive gesture could have. Later, Lauren joined us. She apologized again and admitted that she had been focused on her own insecurities. She said she never intended to make me feel unimportant. I believed that she was being sincere. I also understood that people can make mistakes when they are focused only on their own worries. That evening, I went home feeling different. The situation was not magically erased. I still remembered the hurt, but I also saw something I had not expected. Sometimes a family crisis reveals the weaknesses in a relationship, but it can also reveal the willingness people have to change. Ethan had learned that love does not mean taking from someone who will always support you. Lauren had learned that a family is built on respect, not just personal desires. And I had learned that protecting my own happiness was not selfish. It was necessary. As I looked at the empty space where my RV had once been parked, I no longer saw only what was lost. I saw a reminder of a lesson my family needed to learn. Dreams matter. Boundaries matter. And love without respect is not enough. But there was still one thing I needed to understand. I needed to know whether Ethan's actions would continue after the apology, because real change is not proven in one emotional moment. It is proven in what happens afterward. After the day at Lakeside RV dealership, I thought the hardest part was behind us. I believed that once the truth was spoken and apologies were made, things would naturally begin to heal. But I quickly learned that rebuilding trust is not about one conversation. It is about the small choices people make every day after they realize they have caused pain. For years, Ethan had been the person I trusted most. When he made that decision about my RV, it changed the way I saw our relationship. Not because of the item itself, but because it made me question whether he truly understood me. Now I needed to see if his actions would match his words. Over the next several weeks, I noticed changes in Ethan. They were not dramatic or attention-seeking. He did not try to fix everything with expensive gifts or big promises. Instead, he started showing up in simple ways. He called just to ask how my day was going. He stopped by on weekends and helped with small projects around the house. He asked about my plans and listened when I talked. Those moments may have seemed ordinary to someone else, but to me, they mattered. They showed me that he was learning to value the relationship, not just repair the mistake. One Saturday morning, Ethan came over while I was sitting outside with my coffee. The weather was beautiful, and I was looking through travel brochures I had collected before everything happened. He noticed them on the table and smiled. "Mom, are you still planning your trip?" he asked. I looked at the brochures and nodded. "I hope so." Ethan sat down beside me. "I want you to know something. I realize now that I was thinking about your RV as something you owned. I was not thinking about what it represented." I listened carefully. "And what do you think it represented now?" I asked. He looked toward the garden. "It represented the life you built after spending years taking care of everyone else. It represented the moment when you finally decided to do something for yourself." Hearing that from him meant more than he knew. Because for so long, I wondered if he saw my sacrifices as something normal instead of something meaningful. "Ethan," I said, "I never wanted you to feel guilty for building your own life. I wanted you to understand that my life matters too." He nodded. "I understand that now." Later that month, Lauren invited me to spend an afternoon with her. At first, I was unsure, because our relationship had changed after everything happened. But I accepted because I believed healing required effort from everyone. We met at a small cafe near her neighborhood. Lauren seemed nervous, but she spoke honestly. She told me she had spent a lot of time thinking about what happened. She admitted that she had been focused on her own feelings and did not consider how her choices affected me. "I think I was so worried about changing myself that I forgot to appreciate the people who already accepted me," she said. I appreciated her honesty. I did not expect her to erase the past. I only wanted her to understand it. "Lauren," I told her, "everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after you recognize them." She smiled softly. "I hope we can build a better relationship." I told her I hoped so too. That conversation did not suddenly make us close overnight. Trust does not return that quickly, but it created something important. It created respect. As the months passed, my relationship with Ethan and Lauren slowly changed. I began to see that family relationships are not always about avoiding problems. Sometimes problems reveal what needs to be strengthened. The situation with the RV showed us where communication had failed. It showed us where assumptions had replaced honest conversations. But it also gave us a chance to correct those mistakes. One evening, Ethan called and asked me something unexpected. "Mom, would you like to come with us to look at RVs again?" I was quiet for a moment. Part of me felt emotional because I remembered the pain of losing the first one. But another part of me felt hopeful. I realized the meaning of the RV had changed. It was no longer only a symbol of what happened. It was becoming a reminder that I could still move forward. I smiled and said, "Yes, I would like that." Because I had finally learned something important. A dream delayed is not always a dream destroyed. Sometimes life takes us through difficult moments before showing us a better path. And as I prepared for the next chapter of my life, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer waiting for someone else to give me permission to enjoy the future I had worked so hard to create. When Ethan asked me to look at RVs again, I realized something had changed inside me. A few months earlier, The thought of another RV brought back feelings of disappointment and betrayal. I remembered the empty space in my driveway and the phone call from Rick that changed everything. But now, I was beginning to see that my dream had never truly been about the RV itself. The RV was a symbol of something deeper. It represented independence. It represented the promise I made to myself that after years of caring for others, I would finally make time for my own happiness. That dream was still mine, and no one could take that away from me. The following weekend, Ethan and Lauren picked me up, and we visited several RV dealerships together. At first, I felt a little uncomfortable. Part of me wondered if I was moving too quickly. Could I really trust this experience again? But as we walked through different models, I noticed something important. Ethan was not making decisions for me. He was asking what I liked. He was listening. He wanted to know what features mattered to me and what kind of travel experience I imagined. It was a small change, but it showed me that he finally understood the difference between helping someone and taking control of their choices. At one dealership, I found an RV that reminded me of the one I had lost. It had a comfortable living area, a practical kitchen, and enough space for the adventures I had been planning. I stood inside for several minutes, imagining the places I could visit. I thought about national parks, quiet mountain towns, and mornings where I could drink coffee while watching the sunrise. Ethan noticed my expression and smiled. "Mom, I think this one feels like you." I laughed softly. "That is a strange thing to say about an RV." He smiled back. "I mean, it feels like the life you wanted." Those words stayed with me because they showed me that he finally understood the emotional meaning behind the dream. Later that day, we sat together and talked about the past few months. Ethan admitted that losing my trust had been harder for him than he expected. "I thought saying sorry would fix it," he said, "but I learned that trust comes back slowly." I nodded because he was right. I also learned something during that time. I had spent many years being the person who solved problems for everyone else. I was used to giving, supporting, and making things easier for the people I loved. But I had forgotten that allowing others to care for me was also important. I did not have to carry everything alone. Lauren also became more open with me during that period. She shared that she had been thinking about how quickly one decision could affect an entire family. She said she wished she had handled things differently. "I was focused on what I thought I needed," she told me, "but I did not think enough about what my choices meant for someone else." I appreciated her honesty. I did not need perfection from her. I only needed awareness and respect. Over time, our relationship became more comfortable. We started sharing simple moments together. We cooked meals. We talked about everyday things. We laughed more. It was not the same relationship we would have had if the mistake never happened, but in some ways, it became more genuine because it was built on honesty. A few weeks later, I finally chose an RV that felt right. This time, the purchase was different. It was not about proving that I still had control over my life. It was about celebrating that I never lost it. When I brought it home, I stood in my driveway again, just like I had done months earlier. But the feeling was completely different. Before, I stood there with excitement that turned into heartbreak. Now, I stood there with gratitude. I realized that sometimes life takes away the thing we think we need, only to teach us something more important about ourselves. My RV was never the reason I felt happy. It was the reminder that I was still allowed to dream. And as I prepared for my first trip, I knew this journey was about more than traveling across America. It was about moving forward without carrying the weight of the past. When I finally took my first trip in my new RV, I realized that the journey was about much more than the miles on the road. For years, I had imagined traveling across America, but I never imagined that my biggest journey would be learning how to rebuild trust with my own family. As I drove down the highway that morning, I looked through the windshield and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. I was not thinking about what had been taken from me. I was thinking about everything I had gained. The first destination I chose was a quiet lakeside town a few hours away from my home. I wanted somewhere peaceful where I could slow down and enjoy the simple things I had dreamed about for so long. I parked the RV near the water, made a cup of coffee, and sat outside watching the morning light appear. It was exactly the kind of moment I had imagined when I first bought my RV. But this time, the happiness felt different. It was not connected to an object. It came from knowing that I had finally allowed myself to enjoy my own life. During that trip, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that happened with Ethan. I thought about the phone call from Rick. I thought about the disappointment I felt when I learned what my son had done. I thought about the conversations that followed and the effort it took for all of us to understand each other. For a while, I believed the situation had only shown me how much I had lost. But now I saw something else. It had also shown me how important honest communication was. Before everything happened, Ethan and I loved each other, but we had both made assumptions. I assumed he understood how meaningful my dream was. He assumed I would forgive anything because I had always been supportive. We were both wrong in different ways. Love alone is not always enough. Families also need respect, boundaries, and the willingness to listen. A few days after my trip began, Ethan called me. He asked where I was and wanted to hear everything about my adventure. I could hear the excitement in his voice as I described the places I visited and the people I met along the way. "Mom, I am really happy you are doing this," he said. I smiled. "I am happy too." Then he became quiet for a moment. "I know I almost took this away from you." I looked out at the lake and thought about how much had changed. "Ethan, you made a mistake. But what matters is that you learned from it." He thanked me for giving him the chance to make things right. I told him that forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about choosing not to let one painful moment define everything that came before or everything that came after. When I returned home from my trip, I noticed that my relationship with Ethan and Lauren had changed in a way I never expected. We were more honest with each other. We talked about things we might have avoided before. There was a new level of respect between us. Lauren even asked me about my future travel plans. She wanted to know where I hoped to go next. That question meant more than she probably realized, because it showed me that she was no longer seeing my dreams as something separate from the family. She was seeing them as part of who I was. One evening, Ethan and I sat outside near the RV. He looked at it and said, "Mom, I used to think this was just a vehicle. Now I understand it was a promise you made to yourself." I smiled because he finally understood the meaning behind it. The RV represented patience. It represented independence. It represented a woman who spent decades caring for others and finally decided she deserved to care for herself too. Looking back, I know the experience changed all of us. Ethan learned that supporting one person should never mean hurting another. Lauren learned that family relationships require understanding. And I learned that protecting my own happiness was not selfish. It was necessary. I still love my son. I still care about his family. But I also learned that love does not mean losing yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is showing them that you value yourself too. As I continued planning my next adventure, I felt grateful. Not because everything had been perfect, but because something stronger had been built from something painful. And I knew there was still one final lesson waiting for all of us. When I look back at everything that happened with my RV, I no longer see it as the moment my son disappointed me. I see it as the moment my family was forced to have. Conversations we had avoided for too long. At the time, I thought I had lost more than a vehicle. I thought I had lost the trust one had built with Ethan over nearly 4 decades. I wondered how someone I raised, someone I loved so deeply, could make a decision about my life without asking me. But as time passed, I realized that painful moments can sometimes reveal truths that we need to understand. They can show us where relationships need more care, more honesty, and more respect. A year after everything happened, I was sitting outside my home with a cup of coffee, looking at my RV parked in the driveway. The morning sunlight reflected off the windows, and I smiled. Not because of the RV itself, but because of what it represented. It represented a promise I kept to myself. It represented a reminder that my dreams still mattered. I had spent so many years taking care of others that I almost forgot I was allowed to have dreams of my own. That lesson was something I would never forget. Ethan and Lauren became a bigger part of my life again, but our relationship was different. It was not based on assumptions anymore. We talked more openly. We asked questions instead of making decisions for each other. We learned that love does not mean knowing everything about someone's feelings without asking. Love means being willing to listen. One afternoon, Ethan visited me and helped me prepare my RV for another trip. As we worked together, he looked at me and said, "Mom, I hope you know that I do not take you for granted anymore." I smiled because those words came from a place of understanding. "Ethan, I never needed you to be perfect. I only needed you to remember that I am a person too." He nodded. "I know that now." That was the moment I realized my son had truly changed. Not because he apologized, not because he tried to fix a mistake, but because he finally understood the importance of seeing me as more than just his mother. I was a woman with my own dreams, feelings, and hopes for the future. Lauren also became someone I appreciated more over time. Our relationship was not built by pretending the past never happened. It was built by acknowledging what happened and choosing to move forward with more understanding. She once told me, "I learned that loving someone means respecting the people who helped shape them." Those words stayed with me because they showed growth. She did not have to become someone else. She simply had to become more aware. Looking back, I realized the hardest part of this experience was not losing my RV. The hardest part was feeling invisible. It was the feeling that my years of sacrifice could be overlooked because someone assumed I would always understand. But I learned something important. Being loving does not mean allowing people to ignore your value. Being forgiving does not mean forgetting your own needs. And being a mother does not mean you stop being your own person. Today, I still travel whenever I can. I explore new places, meet new people, and enjoy the freedom I once dreamed about for so many years. Sometimes Ethan asks about my trips. Sometimes he and Lauren even help me plan them. And every time I start the engine and begin a new adventure, I remember the woman I was before everything happened. I remember the woman who worked hard, saved carefully, and believed that someday she would create a life just for herself. That woman was always there. She was never lost. The experience taught me that family is not about never making mistakes. Every family will face moments of disappointment and misunderstanding. What matters is whether people are willing to learn, change, and rebuild. My son made a choice that hurt me, but he also found his way back. I faced a moment that broke my heart, but I also found a stronger version of myself. And in the end, the greatest lesson was not about an RV. It was about remembering that everyone deserves to have dreams, and no one should ever feel guilty for protecting them. Because sometimes the most important journey is not the one you take on the road. It is the journey of learning your own worth and knowing that you deserve to be valued.